Hi, I'm Marcus with the IndieMusicLab.com. So have you ever grabbed your electric or bass guitar and open up your DAW and pull in that virtual amp plugin only for it to sound like this? Well, it doesn't have to be this way. There are things you and I can do to make these amps sound richer and fuller and more realistic like a real guitar amp. So today I'm going to share 3 tips for how you can get the virtual amp that you probably already have inside of your DAW and how you can make that sound rich and full like a real guitar amp. Let's get into it. Tip number 1 is drench the guitar in saturation, like really drench it. So to illustrate this, I have a track pulled up here. This is a remake of the song Mr. Brightside by The Killers. Now, which I'll leave a link below if you want to check out that remake where I showed you exactly what I did to make this song happen. So what I want to look at now is the bass guitar right here and pay attention to how saturated and distorted it is. Now here it is without the saturation and just the amp. It's fine, it sounds okay, right? But it doesn't punch like the saturated version does. So this is very simple. All I did was grab the saturation knob by Softube. This is a free plugin, and I cranked the heck out of it. As you can see here, it's all the way over at like 4 o'clock, and it is cranking this. And that's it. Sometimes that's all you have to do. We make these things so complicated sometimes. You're like, you have to buy this plugin, you know, this new shiny toy that's out there. You need that to make your stuff. It's like, no, a free saturation plugin, throw it on a bass guitar, and it can completely change the sound. And what this also does, because saturation does this in general, is it brings it to the front of the mix because saturation adds frequencies in the mid-range and the high end. It's a much more effective way than using an EQ to boost because an EQ can only boost what's already there. A saturation adds new frequencies in the mid-range and the high end that sound really good, that have that saturated quality, and it cuts through the mix so much better than if you don't have any saturation on it.
Started out with a kiss, how did it end up like this? It was only a kiss, it was only a kiss. Now I'm falling asleep and she's calling the cab.
Okay, tip number 2 is don't be afraid to use effects and plugins that are outside of the virtual amp that you have. Now, I'm a Studio One user, and one of my favorite effects to add to a guitar track is after it runs through the amp to send it through some distortion. And there's a stock plugin in Studio One called Red Light Distortion that I love to add in certain situations. So I've got this little fuzz riff right here. So this is started by using the amp higher, which is just a stock amp plugin in Studio One.
And I just can't look,
and then what the red light distortion does is adds some extra drive. Hear that? Now you don't have to use red light distortion. Use a distortion that you already have in your DAW and see if it can add a little bit more crunchiness and punchiness to the guitar sound if you feel that that's what is lacking. So I just went with the fuzz option here, crank the drive, and that is what we have here. So now another thing that I really like to add into certain guitar tracks is OTT. I'm sure if you're a producer or if you've been for a while, you know about this plugin. It's an absolutely free plugin. Now what OTT does that is almost better than any other plugin that I've ever had experience with is this is a magician. This plugin is a magician at bringing things that are tucked back in the mix and bringing them to the front without having to turn up the overall volume, because sometimes turning up the volume fader doesn't really do what you need it to do, and you need it to punch through and cut through the mix a little better. OTT is legendary at doing that. So I've got this electric guitar track right here. This is just the classic riff that is very recognizable to Mr. Brightside, right? And I have some OTT on here. That's without it. Here's with it. Brings it to the front, right? OTT is an amazing plugin for that. Another thing that you can experiment with is a doubler or stereo width effects. Now, if you listen to the original, again, this is something that I talk about in the remake of this video, link in the description if you want to check that out, is it changes here to this, where you get this wide sound and this stereo sound. And that is, so I set up an effects channel, and I'm sending this guitar track now to Microshift, which is just a stereo width plugin by Soundtoys. And that adds this flavor. See, there's without it, there's with it. Spreads it out, and it's just for a certain part of the song. So again, there's a lot to be said for, you know, automation, switching things up and implementing one thing for one section and then scrapping it for the rest. You want variation in your song. That's the point that I'm trying to get at. Anyway, I digress. That's not the topic of the day, but it is important. So yeah, just use plugins, especially I highly recommend OTT if the track isn't cutting through the mix like you want it to. That can really help. And also just use some external distortions that aren't inside of your amp plugin. That can also help the guitar to be more crunchy and more realistic sounding when you add some extra effects on top of the amp plugin. Alright, now real quick before we get to tip number 3 and wrap up this video, I want to let you know about a free gift I have for you. It is called the 5 Steps to a Spotify Level Production. This is just a free guide that will help you get a better understanding and an idea of what it takes to produce a song from start to finish. I take you through the 5 steps. This will give you a plan, so if you've been feeling like you're lacking structure and a plan, download this and implement it for the song you're working on and produce it from start to finish. That's what I'm here to help you do. And I named it Spotify Level because that's the benchmark, that's the goal that I want you to reach, is to be able to make songs and produce music that would fit within a curated Spotify playlist. So if you're interested in that, the link is in the description below. I highly recommend you check it out because I think it's gonna help your music get better faster. All right, let's get to tip number 3. All right, tip number 3, and this one is very obvious, and a lot of you are probably going to be like, duh, but just because it's obvious doesn't mean that it shouldn't be said, because sometimes it's the obvious things that we forget, and that is double your damn guitars. There's no reason for you to not double your guitars, especially when you're talking about power chords, and you're talking about even certain melody lines as well. Doubling is such an easy way to add interest and add stereo width. You don't want to just grab a guitar, especially if you're doing these big power chords, and then just put Microshift on that. Again, you can do that on certain tracks to give it that effect, but by default, I highly recommend doubling your guitar tracks. And that means recording 2 separate takes, getting them as close as you can to each other. It adds so much depth and character to your tracks. Now, a couple tips on doubles that I think are important for you to think about is, number 1, don't use the same preset or amp settings for both guitars. Switch it up. You want the left to sound different than the right. And an extension of that, or a variation of that, is if you have 2 different electric guitars on hand, then use one for the left take and the other guitar for the right take. That will especially give that different sound where you have that separation of the tracks. Now, I only have one guitar at the moment, so I can't do that, but if you're able to, that is a fantastic way to add depth and stereo width and just overall fullness to your tracks. So let me give you an example of what that sounds like in this same song here. So we've got these power chords right here. See, one left. That's and then right. Hear how they sound a little bit different? That's because I have different amp settings for both, and I process them slightly differently. And then here as well with this melody line, it's the same thing. I just recorded it twice, and it adds so much fullness. Alright, so in summary, 3 ways to make your virtual amps rock. Number 1, drench the guitars in saturation. Number 2, use effects and plugins that are outside of the amp plugin. And number 3, double the guitars. Alright, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Again, the 5 steps to a Spotify level production. It's my gift to you for watching this video. It is in the description, so check that out, and I will see you in the next video. Have an amazing day. Happy music making.